Francis Scott Fitzgerald, the most representative author of the so-called jazz age in America, but also a writer whose life was and has been as iconic as his masterpiece, which is The Great Gatsby. Let's see together why. Hi guys, welcome back to Maiora, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about American literature, and we're going to talk about Francis Scott Fitzgerald, one of the most representative American writers for sure. He depicted his age, the jazz age, the American jazz age, in a way that has become completely iconic. And as I said in the introduction, his life, his personal life, was as iconic as his masterpiece, which is The Great Gatsby. So it's very interesting and important to understand what he went through in order to understand his works, and it is also very interesting to notice that the stereotypical let's say idea or interpretation of his works that is so common today is not completely right. I mean, yes, certainly there's a sort of a celebration of the American dream in his works, but let's remember that Fitzgerald's perspective, or his point of view, or his idea, or his interpretation of the American dream, or his context, or his society, his time in general, was extremely multifaceted. So it wasn't just a plain celebration, but on the other side we have just the idea of a potential failure of a society, or a dream that could collapse. Those different perspectives are both very interesting and present, and they were both part of his life. So this is why I've decided to make two videos instead of one, because in this video we're going to talk about his life, how iconic his life was, why, and why he had to experience disappointment and disillusionment. In my next video we're going to talk about the work, so The Great Gatsby, in detail, and we're going to explain exactly what he wanted to convey there, because it's not as stereotypical as people could imagine today. So let's start with his life. As I said before, it was extremely iconic. He was born in 1896 in Minnesota, and he died in 1940 in California. And so we can say that he lived in the first half of the 20th century, and he depicted his age, the jazz age. When we talk about the jazz age, we talk about the 20s mostly, okay? In such an incredible, let's say, representative way that there were no other authors that could do that. He was a novelist, and we know that, but he also wrote short stories, and he spent his entire life in America and in France. And as I said before, his life was as celebrated as his works. His life was so incredibly iconic. He became so famous, and he spent most of his life with his wife Zelda, and this couple was considered, let's say, the true and perfect representation of that age in the best way possible at the time. But it's also true that they had to face, let's say, failure. They had to face pain and a sort of, as I said before, a sort of a disillusionment, okay, that kind of destroyed their lives. Well, let's start from the beginning. So Fitzgerald's father was completely different from the, let's say, J. Gatsby, okay, from the hero of the jazz age. So he was a sort of an unsuccessful aristocratic man. While his mother was completely different. She was very energetic. She was an energetic provincial woman, very active. And something very interesting is that his name, I mean, Fitzgerald was actually named after Francis Scott Key. That was his father's decision, and Key was we know that was the author of the American anthem. So we can imagine that Fitzgerald's life was bound to be connected and intertwined with the American fate and destiny. Okay, and that happened, I mean, since he was born, actually. Let's say that he combined during his life, in his works, but also, I mean, that was the way he felt, he could combine some ambivalent feelings, okay, about American life. On one side, there was this very let's say individualistic idea of the American dream. On the other side, there was this romantic imagination, probably, I don't know, probably it could come from the aristocratic origins of his father. However, he defined this romantic imagination this way. He said it was sensitivity to the promises of life. And unfortunately, some of these promises were unfulfilled, and yeah, they ended up in disillusionment. So that was quite, yeah, they ended up being quite a tragic part of his life. He studied at Princeton University, and he was a prominent figure in literary life. He was a leading figure in Triangle Club, which was a sort of a dramatic society. And at the time, he fell in love with Ginevra King. Then he lost her, and he flunked out of Princeton, and then he came back to Princeton, and then he left Princeton again, but for another reason now, because it's 1917, so First World War, and he had to join the army. While he was stationed in Alabama, he met his future wife, Zelda Sayre, and she was the daughter of a Supreme Court judge. And he fell in love, and he wanted to move to New York City, in order to make money, to earn money. This is also part, the economical side of the American dream is also something he focused on, and he didn't want to hide. So that was his idea, and so he could marry Zelda. He failed, and Zelda broke up, and so he went back to Minnesota. When he was in Minnesota, he decided to rewrite a novel that he had started at Princeton, and it was then published in 1920. And the name of the novel, the title of the novel, was This Side of Paradise. It was a novel about, let's say, new generations and the morality, new values of young people in general. And he became so famous. This novel could give him fame and a lot of work, and he could marry Zelda. Again, he started working for quite a few magazines of literary prestige, like, for example, the Scribner's, and also other magazines that were, you know, high-paying publications, like, for example, the Saturday Evening Post or similar. Well, at the time, the couple had a great popularity. I'm saying the couple because it wasn't just him, but it was him and Zelda. Okay, it happens all the time today as well. Okay, that a couple becomes iconic. They become the representation, the ideal of a specific time. Okay, or the ideal of that kind of society, for example. And they were defined as the prince and princess of their generation. Obviously, Fitzgerald loved this role, he enjoyed it, and it was gratifying, you know, but at the same time he was scared of it. He was he wasn't sure, okay, he could be able to carry this weight. And that's how his novel The Beautiful and Damned was born, and it was published in 1922. And that was anyway still a good moment for the couple. They were waiting to inherit a fortune, and then they did. But in a few years, it was something was I don't know, something was broken. Someone defined the couple as lost. They lost their grip on their life, on society, on each other, and well, they decided to leave America. So together with their daughter Scotty, they moved to France, to the Riviera, where, I mean, a lot of American expatriates, especially belonging to their social class, lived at the time. And there Fitzgerald started writing a novel, which is Tender is the Night, and this novel will be the last novel he completes, okay, in his life. But in 1925, and this is a very pivotal date, he completed The Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby was an incredible success, and obviously an immortal success, because it represented his own divided nature. Okay, there was on one side, okay, in the novel, we're going to see that in my next video, because we're going to analyze the novel, we're going to talk about the plot, and to talk about the message you wanted to convey, or anyway the feelings that somehow are conveyed. But what we can say already is that these two characters, okay, Gatsby on one side and the narrator, which is who is Nick Carraway on the other side, represent two completely different perspectives, okay, on that society, and two completely different sides of Fitzgerald personality, or his let's say his way to perceive his society and his own life. Okay, on one side there's this naive guy from the Midwest who really believed in the American dream, and is obviously J. Gatsby. And on the other side there was this, let's say, compassionate Yale gentleman who is the narrator, Nick Carraway. So this novel, which is often defined as the most profound American novel, the most representative American novel of the time, of course, connects somehow Gatsby's dream on one side, so this sort of a Platonic conception of himself as Fitzgerald defined it, which is quite self-centered, it's quite individualistic, and on the other side the dream of the discoverers of America and the rediscover of America. So it's obviously a metaphorical discover that is connected to a set of values and a specific lifestyle. As I said before, Fitzgerald hasn't always written novels. He also wrote short stories, and especially I'm talking about All the Sad Young Men. And we can also understand from the title that his last, the next decade of his life and the last part of his life was quite unhappy. He drank too much. Zelda started developing a sort of a compulsion, or he started dancing, practicing ballet night and day, and it was obviously a way to compensate the fact that she was having just some troubles, with her emotional balance, and she had 2 breakdowns, and she never recovered from her second one. In in the 1930s, in general, Fitzgerald, he really tried to save their lives, to do something for himself, to stop drinking, or however, to drink less, and to reconnect with Zelda, but he couldn't. And that was such a huge failure. Everything that the couple represented or had represented until that time was now completely, let's say, destroyed by this utter and complete failure. He talks about this period. I'm gonna quote his words. They're so much more meaningful than my own explanation. He said, I left my capacity for hoping on the little roads that led to Zelda's sanitarium. That says a lot. That says a lot. So his hopelessness, his feeling that, like, I mean, he had to give up on everything they had been, okay, until that moment, on her, obviously, and he lost this hope on this road, little roads, okay, so they're not huge and main roads, they're little roads, those little roads that are often overseen or not even considered in society, okay, but that sometimes that are, okay, part of our decisions, or something that happens in our life, and we have to drive and to let's say, to discover those roads, and sometimes they are not leading us to what we would like to achieve in the world. And let's say that he had completely lost that sense of achievement or hope in, or dream, okay, and so he got completely lost. And obviously part of the loss, a huge part of the loss, depending on the fact that his wife was lost herself, and it was actually impossible for her to recover. So obviously in these few lines there's a lot, okay, they're very intense because there's a lot to say. They're much more profound and more deep, much deeper than we could actually imagine just reading this quote and imagining him driving along these roads. But it's quite a profound insight, okay, in what their life was at the moment. However, in 1934, he actually finished Tender is the Night. You remember I told you it was the last novel he finished in his life. This was actually the last complete novel he wrote, and he actually talks about a psychiatrist that marries a patient, and she exhausts his own vital forces. He talks about the man as that was obviously a French expression, and homme épuisé, so a man that was completely used up, okay. And again, we find this feeling of let's say, of a lack of strength, a lack of vital force, a lack of hope, a lack of the ability, okay, to keep fighting in a way. So at the time he had completely, he had lost hope on Zelda. He could be defined an alcoholic, okay. But in spite of that, he still managed to work, and he even became script writer in Hollywood, where he fell in love with Shalila Graham. She was a journalist. Well, actually, she was more of a gossip columnist. But let's say that he lived a sort of a quiet life with her from that moment on, and quiet apart from moments of reported violence and bitterness when he was especially drunk, let's say so. Occasionally he went to visit Zelda at the sanitarium, at the hospital, and also his daughter, okay, Scotty, at college. In 1939 he began writing a novel that was about Hollywood. So this new world he was exploring, that's another discover, okay, of America. Okay, that was a new discover, a new aspect of the American dream. And the name of the novel was supposed to be The Last Tycoon, and it was actually based on the life of a producer whose name was Irving Thalberg. Let's say that it was his last attempt to at creating, let's say so, or representing the American dream. And he was obviously incomplete because he died at the age of 44 because of a heart attack. And what we have today is the witness of a man who somehow embodied the values, the good and the bad sides of his society and his time, and that's why he's remembered as the most representative author of his time. Obviously because of his work, The Great Gatsby, and we're going to see why and how he represented that life, but also because he was his era. He was the jazz age, the American jazz age. He was that kind of man. He believed in that dream, and he saw that dream collapsing. So he was, I mean, let's say that in his own life and in his own nature, we can find all the contradictory elements of that specific time, which makes it so much more interesting, because as I said at the beginning, it's not just a celebration, it's not just a sort of a, let's say, I don't know, a sort of a representation of a great and amazing and idealistic life, but it's more than that. It's idealism and the opposite, success and the opposite, and failure on the other side. Okay, it's hope and hopelessness. So it's absolutely interesting to start talking about his work, The Great Gatsby, in detail, and to find out why his perception of his society and his life was absolutely not stereotypical, but it was very modern, very deep, and very multifaceted. So stay tuned, okay, and follow. Obviously, if you haven't yet, subscribe the channel and click on the bell and stay tuned, because the next video will be about The Great Gatsby. Please remember, for those of you who are Italian, that there is an Italian playlist where I explain all of this in Italian, okay, so you can follow more easily probably. And we have many playlists about English literature, English language, German language, and so much more. This is what this channel is about. So thank you so much for being here, and stay tuned. See you again.